Hello, welcome to another edition of Advanced English Conversation. Professor Kent Lee here, and we are back to our discussion of pop psychology. First, we have some questions I left you with for last time. I think about 3 questions. I've got some more for you. One question dealt with the left-right brain stuff. We're going to take these one by one. Then the next one was about gender differences, and third one was about dreams. And I'm going to add another one which is not in the handout from last time, but it's about learning styles. Talk about that. Because these are really important ideas, they're floating out there in the internet and SNS and in the public domain, and sometimes people tell you things based on these kinds of ideas. They may give you advice or suggestions based on these kinds of ideas. So these are important. It's important to kind of analyze these critically and carefully so you can be an intelligent consumer, an intelligent citizen, an intelligent adult who is not kind of tricked or taken in by just anything that anybody says. These are crucial academic skills for English or for any language, anything you do in university level or college level or in the workplace or in future studies. These are kind of important skills. So it's not just the psychology here, but it's about your life skills. First one, we'll take these one by one. The left-right brain stuff. This is really popular. It's been popular for a long time, for decades. Now, properly speaking, you don't have a left and right brain, but people use those terms a lot when they talk about this in pop psychology kind of context. It's actually left and right hemisphere, hema from Greek for half, hemisphere. You really have left and right hemispheres. But anyway, you've heard this. The left brain is logical, analytical, and it does language and math, verbal stuff. And the right brain is more creative and intuitive, intuition, that is kind of non-logical kinds of judgments and thinking, where you kind of make a good guess based on your feelings, your intuition about something. And the right brain is creative, does music and art, supposedly. So supposedly, some people are left brain, they're more dominant in math or verbal or logical thinking skills. Some people are right-brained, they're more creative, artistic, musical. Can you be left-brained or right-brained? And is this stuff true? Is it really true? I probably asked you to do it for a Google form, but I also want you to, after having thought about it in the Google form, I also want you to maybe talk to somebody right now. Pause the video and talk about this again for a couple of minutes. Is there any truth to these kinds of claims? Okay, pause the video and discuss this. All right, left-right brain stuff. First of all, where is language done? What parts of your brain do language? Well, it's more complicated than what you have heard. I don't know if you've had any classes, any linguistics classes where you've talked about this stuff. All right. If you are right-handed, your left hemisphere probably does things like grammar and the sound structure of language. But is that all there is to language? Is language just grammar and sound structure and word forms and such? If you're left-handed, though, the grammar and sound structure, or phonology is the term, is handled by the right side. Yes, that's kind of strange. Why is that? I'm not sure, and I don't think scientists fully know either. But again, is grammar, phonology, or sound structure, is that all there is to language? No, it isn't. There are other things that are So if you're right-handed and your left side is doing grammar, this is my left side, your right hemisphere, parts of your right hemisphere are doing other aspects of language. Things like how you make inferences, how you understand metaphors and idioms, how you understand what we call the pragmatics, how you interpret things in context, how you interpret pragmatics of language, and even things like intonation. Like you could say okay with different intonations and get different meanings. Okay, 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 okay. Get different meanings with a different intonation. That's handled by your right hemisphere. And there are other aspects of language that are handled by the left or the right hemisphere. It's not so simple. What about vocabulary? Your understanding of words and what they mean, like the word dog and the word camera and the word history and things like that. Well, that stuff, your understanding of words and their meanings and your knowledge about the world and the words for those things, it's all over your brain. It's all over in different parts of your brain. It's not a left-right brain kind of thing. It's much more complicated than that. And this is something that research psychologists and neuroscientists, brain scientists, neuroscientists have known for decades. It's no secret. But this kind of nonsense gets popularized. What about math? Math and geometry. Some aspects of mathematical thinking are done in the left, but some are done in the right. When it comes to recognizing faces, recognizing objects, oh, that's a table, oh, that's my table. Different aspects of those skills are done by the right and the left sides of the brain. Recognizing objects, recognizing that, oh, that's my chair. Different sides of the brain are involved. What about music? Is that a right hemisphere thing? Not necessarily. What we call the emotional or affective aspects of music and some other aspects of music are processed by the right side, but things like sound sequences and how you interpret sound sequences and how music people interpret that and understand them is done by the left side. What about art? I'm not sure about art. Probably both sides because it involves geometry and math and aesthetics. It's all over the place. There is no evidence also that the left side is logical and the right side is creative and things like that. There's no evidence at all for that claim. And this is the truth, and it's truth that psychologists and social scientists and brain scientists have known for decades. Where does this stuff come from? It's not true. So you cannot be left-brained or right-brained. You might be dominant in language, or you might be better at math, you might be better at music, but it has nothing to do with right or left hemispheres. Nothing at all. You use all of your brain for a lot of different things, for most things. There's no truth to it. How did this get started? Well, we'll kind of come back to that later on. Next question, male and female cognitive differences. You may have heard men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Okay. When it comes to maybe other things that are not strictly cognitive, social skills, emotions and such, we're not going to talk about that today. Yeah, obviously there are differences between men and women. Obviously, nobody denies that. But here we're talking about cognitive or intellectual differences. Is it true, for example, that there are innate or natural differences from nature between men and women when it comes to intelligence? Or is it all nurture or environmental, how they're raised and brought up, what they're exposed to, the environment, and things like that? So is it true that men are naturally better at math and science? Men are better at visual, spatial skills. For example, one claim is that in research experiments, men can do what's called mental rotation. They can answer questions based on having to maybe think of an object. They see a picture of an object and they have to mentally rotate it and answer a question about, okay, what would this look like if it's turned the other way, if it's turned left to right, or turned around 180 degrees, and questions that involve that kind of thinking. Men have done better on those kinds of tasks in psychology labs, that's true. But does that mean that there is an innate or natural difference, that men are naturally better at that kind of thing? It's been claimed that women are better at verbal and social skills, and the verbal part, okay, there may be truth to that. I actually don't know enough about the research, but I've heard of some research that says that. But does it mean that men are just naturally worse at language and verbal skills and learning? Social skills, that's maybe a different thing that involves more than just cognition, involves other things, so I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk strictly about cognitive or intellectual abilities. Is it true that women are better at multitasking? And you may have heard that, okay, supposedly women have more connective tissue between both hemispheres, both sides of the brain. Is that true? It allows them to multitask better. Pause the video and discuss this in more detail. All right. The consensus or agreement of psychology researchers and brain scientists, neuroscientists, is that there are no significant or major cognitive or intellectual differences between men and women. Some of the differences can be explained through nurture or upbringing. Men used to be traditionally dominant in math and science. Why? Those were perceived as male things and boy things. And so boys were, whether it's in Korea or in the US or in Europe, boys were often encouraged to pursue their interest in math and science. And traditionally, girls were discouraged from that, saying, oh, that's boy stuff, that's stuff for girls. And really, that has been a big social factor, a big reason why even today, fewer women, it's one reason why fewer women have gone into math and science and engineering and more men have gone into those fields. It's at least partly nurture, or largely nurture. Visual spatial skills, including psychology experiments showing that men do better at those kinds of skills. Is it because of innate natural differences? What might cause those kinds of differences? Can you think of a better explanation besides just nature, that men are naturally better at that? This is kind of controversial. So in psychology research right now, there's some controversy and debate about this. But when you look at all the studies showing that men are supposedly better at visual spatial skills and tasks like mental rotation or finding their way around a city or something like that, is it just nature? Is there a nurture-based explanation? Think about this. How are boys maybe raised differently than girls traditionally in a way that might encourage boys and men to have better visual spatial skills? Do fathers play with, or do parents play with their boys and girls, their sons and daughters differently? Do they raise them differently? A lot of psychologists would point to these factors, how parents maybe play differently. Maybe they, especially fathers, play a lot more actively and roughly with their sons than with their daughters, and sign them up for sports classes. Oh, the boy, he's going to go to soccer lessons, and the girl, she's going to music lessons. This could be an explanation for these differences in performance in psychology experiments. So there's a lot of debate in psychology. So there's not enough evidence that these differences are due to nature, that they're innate. The reason why girls may be better, even from early age, better at speaking, talking, and learning languages, verbal skills, there might be a biological or nature-based component to that. I've heard of some research supporting that, but I think there is still a lot we don't know, because there are also important social and cultural factors involved. How parents raise their daughters differently. how in the culture girls are expected to maybe speak more and engage in a lot of girl talk and women talk and social interaction. So it's not entirely clear to me, but it could be cultural, social factors, or it could be a complex mixture of biological and cultural factors. So there are some complexities, and there's a lot of debate in psychology. So there's some psychologists who will say when it comes to cognitive differences, there are no differences at all between men and women. There are other psychologists, like the famous guy you may have heard of, Steven Pinker, who argues there are differences, but they're subtle or fine-grained, and he is careful to say there are no significant or major differences. And it's not true that, so no serious psychologist or neuroscientist would say that men are naturally better at math. They might say, oh, there might be some very subtle, small, fine-grained differences, not general things like math, but maybe much smaller things, maybe mental rotation tasks or something like that. So there are no serious psychologists who would say that there are major intellectual or cognitive differences, only very minor, and that's a point of debate, point of ongoing research and debate, and will be for quite some time. So there might be subtle, fine-grained differences. Are women better at multitasking? Well, I'm not sure about that. But we need to be careful here when we talk about multitasking. Multitasking is something that humans are generally not good at when it comes to true multitasking. You can multitask if two tasks, one or especially both tasks, are kind of relatively mindless. So for example, I can multitask. I can drive a car, especially in the highway, and talk to somebody. That's multitasking. Because driving a car, if the road is clear and there's nothing that demands your attention, especially on a highway, yes, anybody can multitask. Driving a car is automatic, and while you're doing one automatic thing, you can do something else, like talking to somebody or listening to the radio. So kind of low-level multitasking, I don't know if men and women are really different. I don't know the research there, maybe, okay. But when it comes to real multitasking between things that require your attention, we can't do it. Try reading a book and watching an informative YouTube video. You can't do it. Or try working on writing something while you're listening to a YouTube video. You can't really pay attention to both. It's not possible. True multitasking is not really possible. Kind of automatic multitasking where at least one of the things is automatic and the other doesn't require a whole lot of attention. That's different. Why is this stuff important? How many of you were maybe as children steered away from something you were interested in because of these cultural ideas about gender differences? Oh, son, you should study math and science. That's real boy stuff. And oh, daughter, that math and science stuff, that's for boys. Why don't you take music lessons? How many of you were steered away from something you were interested in because of that? That is a subtle kind of discrimination. Does it affect you as adults? Yes. I mean, how many companies are more likely to hire men, especially for certain positions, because they think, oh, that's a male job. And females, oh, okay, secretary. Why secretary? Why not an interpreter, a translator, an engineer, something more professional? This kind of discrimination still happens because of these cultural ideas about men and women and thinking, oh, men are better at this naturally and women are better at that naturally. And again, I'm not talking about social or other kinds of differences. I'm talking about cognitive and intellectual differences. And there aren't any that should make a difference when it comes to hiring decisions. So discrimination is a real issue based on some of these pop psychology beliefs. So the pop psychology allows people to justify their discriminatory attitudes towards men and women, for example, in companies and in hiring, promoting people and deciding when and whom to promote to a higher position. So this is a real issue. Pop psychology is sometimes not harmless when it leads to or supports or feeds into discrimination, even if it's relatively subtle in discrimination or unintentional. Maybe they don't mean to discriminate, it's not intentional, but it's real. Next, dreams. Are your dreams telling you something? Should you try to interpret your dreams? Find out some secret meaning, hidden meaning, symbolic meaning to better understand yourself and your mind and understand your life? Should you do that? Was Freud entirely right about dreams, that dreams have some special meanings that can be interpreted? What do you think? Pause the video and discuss. Okay, when you're asleep, you go through several what we call REM cycles. Maybe you've heard of REM, R-E-M, rapid eye movement. Your eyes are closed, but your eyes are moving rapidly. You need you go through several cycles throughout the night, lasting from a few minutes up to about an hour and a half. That involves REM sleep. So there are different stages of sleep. So you need the pre-REM, what comes before the REM. That's a somewhat deep sleep, and then you need the deeper REM sleep. You need that. You need all of that, and you need enough of these cycles. You're going in and out through REM cycles throughout the 6 to 8 hours that you sleep. And you need enough sleep and enough REM sleep in order for your brain to function. If you don't, your brain doesn't work the next day. And so you need to dream. Now, you tend to only remember the dreams you had right before you wake up. You have dreams all throughout the night. You just don't remember most of them. You mainly remember those kind of at the end of a cycle, and maybe you come to the end of a cycle and you kind of come to a lighter sleep, and then you might remember it, and you go back into REM sleep, and then the dreams right before you woke up in the morning. But you dream throughout the night. You just don't remember most of your dreams. Is there symbolic meaning to these dreams? Freud was kind of wrong. Okay, occasionally your dreams have symbolic meaning. Occasionally, sure, but not most of the time. There's nothing magical about dreams. It's simply an information processing mechanism. While you're asleep, your brain needs time. One reason you need sleep is your brain needs time to kind of take all the information and experiences of the past day and kind of sort them out and kind of interpret them and kind of decide, okay, where am I going to store this information? Where am I going to store these memories of what happened today? Where are you going to store this stuff that I've learned? Dreaming is a part of this. It's not fully understood how or why this happens, the role of dreams in this kind of information processing and information kind of storage that your brain does while you're asleep. There are several different theories about exactly what dreams do and why they happen, but pretty much the consensus in psychology is that it's an information processing tool of some kind for processing and putting away information. So your brain is kind of matching different bits of information, things that happened today and things that happened in your past, and trying to say, okay, does this go here or does this go here in my memories or in my long-term memory? So your brain is kind of matching up things randomly, so you have weird combinations in your dreams, like you're talking with your current classmate, but it's in your hometown where you lived 10 years ago, weird stuff like that. So you may have seen websites or books or people claiming they can interpret your dreams. It's all nonsense. It's quackery. Quack is a good word to know. It's a slang term in English. For example, a fake doctor, a doctor who is bad, incompetent, or even fake, he's not a real doctor, is a quack, from the quacking sound of a duck. Quack, quack. So he's a quack. So quackery is some kind of nonsense, either medical nonsense or maybe also health or psychology-related nonsense. It's not true. Anybody who claims that dream interpretation is important or that they can do it is a quack. They're a fraud. They don't know what they're talking about. They're not trained in psychology. And they're not qualified to interpret your dreams. Next one is learning styles. You may have heard of this. Some of you are going to be teachers, and this is kind of a popular idea in some areas of education, learning styles. And there are different theories about learning styles, a lot of theories. I'll focus on one of the main theories, and it's the theory that, kind of the VAK theory, that some people learn better when they, for example, read or get visual input. I feel like I'm a visual learner. I prefer to read or see text and learn that way. Some people feel like they are auditory learners. They learn better when they hear something, from hearing, auditory. And some people might say, oh, I learn better kinesthetically, from something that's moving, or when I'm moving, or I see something moving, or an experience something kinesthetic. From moving or touching or feeling something, I'm a kinesthetic learner, hands-on learner. I need to use my hands and do something, feel something, kinesthetic learner. Is it true? Do you learn better when you learn according to your learning style? Like if the teacher teaches according to your preferred learning style, does this really work? There are apparently a lot of studies out there on different theories of learning styles, claiming that yes, they have some evidence showing that students prefer this and they learn better this way, for example. But is it really true? Is it scientific? Okay, this is a bit of a harder question. Pause the video and discuss this. A problem with these kinds of claims is there are studies out there supposedly showing that students prefer learning styles and seem to learn better when they learn according to their learning style. You know, one student, a student who feels like, you know, she's a visual learner, seems to do better when learning by reading or visual input and so on. But there haven't been many scientific studies, or properly done scientific study, where you control for different groups to really carefully compare how people do in different situations and do a proper scientific study. The one really good scientific study of the VAK theory, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, showed that there was no actual difference in outcomes if students were taught according to their learning style compared to students who were not taught according to their learning style. It showed that it had no effect on how well they learned in this study. What it did show, though, is students do learn better if they receive a mixture, for example, usually a mixture of visual and auditory. So learning is better if there's a mixture of visual, like the teacher is maybe writing things on the board, or you see a book, or you see notes. There's a visual component, or maybe a PowerPoint, although too much PowerPoint is not good for learning. I don't like PowerPoint, actually. A combination of visual and auditory. You're hearing the professor, for example. You're hearing somebody explain something. So in a classroom, students learn better, according to the research, when they receive a mixture of visual and auditory input, and they go together. Okay, visual and auditory input that go together, they kind of reinforce each other or enhance each other, and they learn better that way. And that's the truth. So these learning styles, they're maybe more like learning preferences. Yes, I feel like I'm a visual learner. That's maybe my preference. Is there possibility that there could still be truth to this learning styles claim? That students learn better if they're taught or if they learn according to their learning style? If there is, we don't yet have enough scientific evidence for it. If there is something there, the effect is maybe not strong enough, and we don't have enough scientific evidence for it. Maybe more research is needed, but so far the best research shows that there's no evidence for learning styles, or that learning according to your learning style really makes a difference in how well you learn, or at least not yet. There's not enough evidence, at least not yet, for it. This is maybe more of a learning preference. But again, what works best is if you have a combination, particularly visual and auditory, in learning. So how did these ideas get started? Things like left brain, right brain stuff is really popular. Psychologists have known for decades, and brain scientists have known for decades, the truth that I have explained to you earlier. It's no secret. Why is the public still being flooded with so much bad information, so much wrong information? The Mozart Effect, still kind of a popular idea, but it's wrong. Why is it popular? Why did it become so popular, especially 20 years ago? Why? How did these ideas become popular? Pause the video and discuss this for a few minutes. Why do these ideas become so popular, and why do they stay on in kind of the public domain, even though psychologists and scientists know that they're false? Why do these continue? Why do these persist? Why do they stay around and continue to be popular? Talk to each other for a few minutes. All right, let's look at a couple examples. One, the Mozart Effect. This started with a small study maybe 2 decades ago, maybe more. It is commonly done, it's commonly the case that in research in psychology, language studies, health science, medicine, medical studies, for example, it's very common for people to do a small study with maybe 20 or 30 subjects, for example, in the study, and if they find something, they don't, they're not going to go out and say, hey, I found something, it's true. That's just a starting point in science. They then need to go and do more studies to kind of really prove, hey, this is a thing, there's something going on here. One small study in science is never enough to prove something. That's not how science works. Whether it's studies about education, psychology, language, health, or medicine. That is not how they work. But what happens? A small study gets reported in the news media, and the news media runs with it, and it gets blown up. It gets exaggerated. And often they end up saying something that maybe the researchers never said. The researchers were probably just reporting a correlation. Hey, there's a correlation here between classical music and the intelligence of these little children. It's just a correlation. We're not saying that there's a cause, but what happens when it gets blown up in the news media and becomes a pop psychology thing, and it's all over the internet, people assume it's a causation. An important phrase in science is correlation does not necessarily mean causation. Correlation, just that there's a relationship. It does mean that one causes the other. It could be something else that's causing both of them, for example. And that's the case with the Mozart Effect. The first small study was kind of a fluke. A fluke is kind of a slang term meaning they got some funny results. It was not normal results. It was a fluke. They got kind of unusual results. They happened to get unusual results in one small study because it was a small group of kids, and they didn't carefully check for something. So in this study, the kids who did better, who were exposed to classical music, turns out that they were, there was something else. It wasn't the music causing it. It was their home environments. Think about this. What kind of kids are going to get exposed to classical music in the home? What kinds of kids? What do you think? Think for a minute. Okay, hopefully you've thought about this. The kids who get exposed to classical music in the home are more likely to come from higher income families, richer families. And it's those families where the parents maybe, or at least somebody has more time to spend with the kids, and they send the kids to private lessons and to better schools. And these are kids that have books in their homes, more books, and so the parents maybe expose them to books, maybe read to them, or they have access to books more than the poorer kids. And that was what was happening in this small study. And they weren't controlling for this. What's in the first study, they did not control for this. They did not properly consider and take into account other factors like parents' income levels, what we call socioeconomic status. And that's a big thing in social science research, socioeconomic status. It was the SES, or socioeconomic status, that was affecting the kids in the study. A lot of later studies were done that carefully controlled for parents' status, income status, socioeconomic levels. And all of these studies found nothing. There was no effect. There was no correlation here. So the correlation really was not between classical music and intelligence. It was between home environment and intelligence, which is no surprise because for decades in education and psychology, we have known that home environment affects intelligence or academic performance, not necessarily innate natural intelligence, but performance on academic tasks or IQ tests. We've known that for years. Kids from higher income homes, richer environments, have an advantage over other kids because they've been exposed to more intellectual stimulation in books and such. But what happened? Why did this become so popular? The news media reported the first little study that claimed a connection between classical music and intelligence. There were a lot of other studies that came out later that said, there's nothing here. When we also look at socioeconomic status, there's no effect of music. None. Did the news media report those? No. Did the news media ever come out and say, do you remember a year ago we told you about the Mozart effect? Well, several new studies have come out and they've shown that there's nothing. Sorry, there's nothing there. Move along, folks. Sorry. They never say that. If it's something that sounds cool, they want that clickbait. So you click on a web link. It's kind of bait. So when you're fishing, you put a little worm at on a hook on your fishing line to attract the fish. That's called bait. Little worm or some kind of food you put to attract a fish or an animal that you're hunting. That's bait. So we use the term clickbait to describe newspaper headlines or internet links that sound cool and attractive that get you to click on them. So especially lower quality media outlets or common internet sites will use clickbait to get you. And this is a very clickbait kind of thing. Mozart effect. Left brain, right brain stuff. There's no truth to it. But it's great clickbait. It gets people to click on a website. Take this test to see if you're left-brained or right-brained. Who promotes this kind of stuff, especially left brain, right brain stuff? Usually people who don't have enough training in psychology, but they want to sell books or they want to make a popular website or something. So it's people who are not qualified to talk about this stuff. They don't understand the psychological research, but they're trying to make money and they're trying to make a name for them, trying to get famous. It's those kinds of people that do this, for example, kind of quackery. So there's a lot of quackery involved in some of this pop psychology. And some news media sites, especially lower quality ones, promote this because it's great clickbait. You want people to visit their websites. So before we go, I want to mention maybe a couple of other kinds of pop psychology and also say something more about one type of popular belief that I mentioned earlier. You might have heard of the Enneagram test. This is an old test of personality types. It goes back to, I think, ancient Greece. You might have heard of the Enneagram. It is from a Greek word for nine, ennea, 9 in Greek. And it is a personality test that classifies you into one of 9 categories. And it kind of makes this little circle diagram of the different personality types and kind of Says if you're here and this type and the person opposite, the opposite type from you may or may not be a good match for you in a relationship or something like that. It is maybe similar to the MBTI in terms of classifying people into fairly simple categories, which sound neat, but they're actually pretty vague categories. They're not very precise, especially in terms of modern psychology and how psychologists really understand the complexity of human personality and behavior and emotions and thinking styles and all that. It's kind of simplistic. It's too simple. It's simplistic to be really accurate. I don't mean to say don't do it. It might be helpful for you a little bit in terms of understanding yourself, just like the MBTI, but it's even less precise and less scientific than the MBTI. So yeah, you can have fun with it, sure, but it's not at all precise or scientific. And there's no real basis for some of the claims it makes for different personality types and how they might go together in social relationships. Let me say a little bit more about backward masking. We're going to maybe talk about this later in the semester. I'll refer you to a video example of it again. In case you've ever heard of this idea, and again, it's the claim that some rock songs contain words that say something forward, like the famous Queen song, another one bites the dust. And so bites the dust, it's kind of a victory or a popular song in sports events, because another one bites the dust, like biting the dust is a metaphor, an idiom meaning to be defeated, to suffer a loss. The other team bit the dust. We beat them. We're the champions. So another one bites the dust. Some claim, well, if you play it backwards, it says, I decided to try marijuana. Listen to recordings of it on YouTube where people play it backwards. It's gibberish. It's nonsense. There's nothing to it. There is no way that a rock singer in a recording studio could possibly sing anything that makes sense forward in English that also means something and makes sense when played backwards. Try it yourself. Try it in a recording software app in your phone. Try to sing another one bites the dust so that backwards it says, I decided to try marijuana. That kind of claim is such nonsense. And claims have been made like this for so many different rock songs and other kinds of songs. Aside from the fact that it's impossible to talk backwards or to say a sentence forward so that it means something, another sentence backwards, try it, it's impossible. It's also impossible for the human brain to kind of decode the language that's backwards. That would mean we somehow evolved in our brains an ability to understand backwards speech. And why in the world would humans ever have developed that kind of an ability? It's crazy talk. It really is. And as a linguist, I'm familiar with the structure of language. There is a lot of abstract structure in language which you are not aware of, especially in the grammar and the sound structure of language. You don't know it's there because you do it subconsciously. It's subconscious. And you don't know what's going on in your head when you're speaking, when you're listening to language, when you're reading something. There's a lot going on because there's a lot of abstract structure in language. And it's not exactly symmetrical. In some ways it is, but in some ways it's not symmetrical or balanced. so that there's no way you could do it backwards if it's not symmetrical. Symmetrical means like both sides are the same. In the abstract structure of language, it's not symmetrical. It's pretty complex. And if you want to know more, you can go for a master's degree, a saksa, or a PhD in linguistics and find out what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of nonsense claims out there about language and about learning, and about education and about psychology. And we'll come to more of these in the semester because, again, these affect you. People might say, you want to learn English, just do this. Or you get a job teaching English someday, and maybe some parents come to you with some really crazy ideas about how you should teach their kids based on some pop psychology that they've read on the internet. A lot of pop psychology, we're going to look at the problems behind it, because this affects our lives. We make decisions sometimes about how to study, how to learn, what to study, based on things we hear about, learning and education, or especially when you're a parent someday. You might be a parent someday, and you're going to be making important decisions about your kids' education. You want to make sure you make informed, intelligent decisions. You want to make sure you make intelligent decisions about your life and the life of your children, lives of people around you as an adult. So it's important to think carefully. And for me, that is the one focus in this class. This is a conversation class, but in order to converse intelligently, you need to understand what you're talking about as a business professional, or as a teacher, or if you're a government worker, working in government or something like that, or just voting, where you make decisions that affect your life and the lives of others. Okay, so we'll continue this next time, and this seems like a lot of psychology, but as we get along in the course, we'll get more into the conversation part of the course, as much as we can, given the fact that we are limited to online lessons, which are not very interactive. So, is that all for today? Pop psychology. Should you believe everything you hear in the news? Well, at least when it comes to science news, health news, news about research in science, medicine, health, psychology, sociology, linguistics, social sciences, or science-related news, you have to be careful, because the news media people, especially mass media or commercial media, they don't necessarily understand what they're talking about. Sounds cool, let's report it. It's a great clickbait headline. Unless it's a professional quality news organization that has a good science journalist or medical journalist who is doing the reporting, and they can explain it. What does this really mean? How should be careful here? This is just one little study. We don't know yet for sure. We can't say we know for sure yet. This is just one little study. You have to be careful. So unless they have a quality medical or science journalist, you have to be careful. If you really want to know about this, better to go to a proper science news website or a science news YouTube channel and find out the truth. When it comes to this kind of stuff, you don't want to trust the general news media. They may not be either qualified to explain it, or they may be, or it could be a lower quality news media site that wants, your clicks and advertising dollars or advertising money. So we're going to continue talking about other kinds of popular beliefs and where they come from. These, by the way, are important because how many parents make decisions about their kids' education? Maybe your parents or teachers pressured you into certain decisions based on some pop psychology beliefs like these or others. These affect us. People make decisions sometimes based on bad information, There's a lot of bad information out there. You have to be intelligent, critical thinkers to better make decisions about your lives. Okay? Because I want you to be empowered to take control of your lives and make better decisions. And that's one thing we're going to do throughout this course. In order to learn English, we need to learn academic English skills, which will transfer to academic Korean or academic anything for college and for the rest of your lives. So until next time, good luck with the Google form. I'll have another Google form for you. Enjoy it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.